Bernard Toney Jr. on the line with us today. Good morning, Bernard.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
Well, I have got to go into how we met. And first of all, again, thank you so much for being here. Every time I see you, I can't help but smile. But just to give the audience a little bit about Bernard, I saw a story about him on LinkedIn, which we'll get to a little bit earlier, and reached out, and he graciously accepted. And when you learn more about this individual, you'll just go, this is one cool, massively cool guy. Bernard was a former White House medical officer. He is also a Tillman Scholar, a global health professional, clinician, educator. He's also the vice chair of Stepping Stones for Global Development, as well as an advanced practice provider at the National Institute of Health. That's a mouthful, man.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there, which means I don't sleep a lot.
But Bernard, just it's again, I don't want to repeat myself, but just the enthusiasm that you bring to not only help, but the things that you're doing have just blown my mind. And the one thing that I wanted to see if you wouldn't mind getting into is what originally brought us together here. And that was an article that I read that said, "Don't tell me that people can't change." and
Right.
and just wondering if we could, well, first of all, feel free to add anything. I have this terrible thing of overriding. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Where do you want me to start? I think is the better question.
Anywhere you'd like to. Anywhere you'd like to.
Well, so the reason why I posted that is I've just retired out of the military after 21 years, and my entry point into the military was drastically different from the way I exited the military. And so I started the military as a young private. So I enlisted at 17 years of age. My mother and father had to sign me into the military, and so I was just a kid. But I was a kid that was, I guess we'll go into that. But I was a troubled kid. I had a lot of problems. Probably riddled with more problems than most, I would suppose. Or maybe not most, but like many people in inner cities in the United States. And so I just carried a lot of that baggage throughout my military career. And at some point, I just had, at every pivotal point in my life in the military, I just had a leader that invested into me, poured into me, and helped me get to where I wanted to be in life.
It's so fantastic. And with that, though, there were some things along the way, though. When we initially contacted each other, there was that little bit. Yeah, there were actually people trying to get me out of there too. Right? How did you navigate that?
How do I navigate that? Well, so here's the thing. There were a lot of things that made me very strange as a young recruit. First, I'll go ahead and mention I had 12 gold teeth. I had 6 gold teeth at the top and at the bottom, and I remember the dentist not looking at me. He was like, "This can't be right. It says you have gold crowns from tooth number 8, 9, 10, 11." And then he looks at me and says, "Oh my God, this is real." um, but one, aside from my aesthetic appearance, the gold teeth, one of the things that happened to me right before I joined the military was I was involved in a drive-by shooting. I was 17 years old. This was March of 1999. I'm dating myself here, but this is March of 1999, and as a result of that drive-by shooting, my best friend Ivan Gray was shot and killed.
Oh,
And so I ended up trying my best to keep him alive until the paramedics came, but I wasn't successful.
wow.
And so that was only 3 weeks before I actually entered onto active duty. So that was late March. I entered onto active duty on April 19th. And so I really came into the military, not just from a troubled background, but just, just having been at a scene of a heinous murder. And so as a part of that, I was going through my initial entry training and such, and I was told that I had to come back to Atlanta, Georgia to testify for the murder trial. And so, in order for me to be able to do that, they had to contact the Army and the drill sergeants had to be involved. And so, that combined with again, my strange aesthetic appearance, um, the leaders at the time didn't think that I was consistent with military service. So they tried to essentially set the conditions that I wouldn't be successful. They would sort of single me out, anything that they can do to sort of push me over the edge. But at the same time, also had this group of people, and those were some of the folks that I tagged in my post that were the antithesis of that. They worked hard to make sure that I was protected enough to be given an opportunity to succeed.
Oh man. When I think of what I went through growing up too, uh, I never saw that kind of craziness, but I have been in those instances where people did not believe in you, whether it be appearance
Right.
or what have you. And it was it was hard for those individuals to look on who you were inside, right?
Hmm.
That sounds really touchy-feely, but the fact of the matter is it
Right.
has an impact. And
Hmm.
and then to think, I think of your group of mentors and friends that believed,
Oh
and
man. Yeah.
what that spark, man. Look at you. I mean, this is you said 20 years removed from after the military. My goodness, how did you pivot when I know you had that foundational piece of friends there?
Right. Right.
How did you how did they help navigate, and then how did you, oh, lack of better words, remove from that gravitational pull of everything else that was trying to pull you
Yeah.
down?
Yeah. I will tell you, I think the post makes it look like there's like this straight line trajectory, which it wasn't. It was much more like the stock market. It was ups and downs all along the way. But what I can say is that every base or installation I went to, I had at least one. And I say God gave me one. God gave me one person every single time to say, "I've got you." I just need you. I'll give you another example. My boss, I was a very low soldier. His name's Anthony Forker. I think he's the senior enlisted advisor for the Triple Army Medical Center in Hawaii now.
Oh,
He heard me on the phone one day. I blew all my money as all young people do, and I was on the phone. And I couldn't pay my car note, and he heard how much I had to pay because I'm talking back and forth with the bank. I come back after lunch, and there's an envelope of cash on my desk.
wow.
And I said, Sergeant, I can't pay this back. I don't have the way to pay this back. He said, you know what you do? You make me proud, and you go out and be successful. That's the way you pay me back. I saw that guy, Anthony Forker, right before I went into the White House. This was uh, 2018. And I said, "Oh my God!" I told my wife, I said, "This is the guy who saved me." And so I said, "I got to go to the ATM and give him this cash." And he said, "Listen, I told you, you've already paid me back multiple times over by being who you are today." And so I've just had people like that throughout my career, and there was always just at least one
Oh,
that was there to kind of help me out.
Anthony Forker, if you're listening to this, you are amazing.
I have a question. So there's such a huge contrast, and we're talking about change. And, obviously there's a massive contrast between where you're at today and where you were when you were, say, a teenager or that type of thing. Man, it, how did you, what was that pivotal point? Because there was always someone that believed in you, but at what
Mhm.
point did you start believing in yourself? Because
Oh,
that had to
that's a
happen.
That's a killer question, man.
that's a good question. I think, I'll be honest with you. I suffer from, for majority of my career, sort of this imposter syndrome,
Mhm.
where I was always placed in like these positions of leadership or what have you. And I never really felt good enough. So it still to this day takes a lot of self reflection and finding value in who I am and whose I am. to be able to say I am good enough. But I do struggle with that, and I'll tell you, even as a Tillman scholar, um, it's not unique to me. Is probably pretty common with a lot of successful people. I was at this recent Tillman Scholar conference, and everyone there, Ivy League, Harvard, Special Forces guys, Rangers, JDs, MDs, and what was common was this idea that I'm not good enough to be in this room. And so I think if you can if you can get people to see that in themselves, to your point, then it's once you start to believe in yourself, that's when that changes. It becomes exponential growth, and I think that's what happened with me. As I started incrementally saying, "I am good enough. I can do this," because up to a certain point in my life, it was just failure compounded by failure. And so once I had a little bit of a taste of success, that kind of fed into that next, the ball started to roll at that point, and I started to say, I can do just about anything, as long as I have the resources. But you gotta have the conditions have to be set, and it's just not only the external conditions, but the internal conditions as well.
But the people that we've been talking with, seems recently, and I'm sure Maurice, you can add on to this, is it's so important that we have someone external that tells us that we can do it. It's kind of like these impromptu mentors that land in our lives. That and so my question to you is how do you pay that forward? How do you take what you've learned, because you have such a powerful story, and how do you pass that along to the younger generations? Because I know I'm sure you do.
I do, and I think really what it is being available, being accessible, and representation, right? So like when I joined the military, I hadn't seen a Black officer until about 2 years into my service. He happened to be a nurse. His name is Clyde Hill, and I remember seeing him, thinking, "Oh my God, I wish I could be." He was a captain. That would be a dream for me, to be a captain in the Army. And ironically, I was in the. I always see these people. It always comes full circle. But I'm in the sauna in Hawaii, and I look over, and I see Clyde Hill. so we ended up going to the same church in Hawaii until I came to the White House as well. But I think really being that representation, that's partly the reason why I made that post on LinkedIn, was because I wanted people to see that look like me, that yes, you can transform, you can evolve, you can develop. But equally so, I wanted people who didn't look like me and didn't come from that background to be able to understand and appreciate that person that you might be writing off right now could be the next CEO, could be the next C-suite executive, could be the next general officer. It just takes the right conditions. And so as a leader, we're responsible for creating those conditions for that growth.
Okay, so both of us, Gary and I, are ASU grads, and so Pat Tillman meant a ton to us in particular.
Yes.
Just he was there when he was playing football when we were there, and just knowing who you are just epitomizes what he stood for. You took the lead, and I
don't know if I could fit in the same. I don't know if I can fit in the same category as Pat Tillman. Let's be clear on that.
He was amazing. I never met Pat, but I had the opportunity to meet his cousin out when I was back at Columbia, because he was on the wrestling team over there, and there was just there's something about those Tillmans, man. They're just amazing. But just looking at how you have grown and developed, and how Gary said it, paying it forward. It's amazing to see the impact that you've had, and the humility you bring to the equation. Just when you're the last guy that I would think would have had imposter syndrome. Really, it's so when you get in, and then when you say that you have a bunch of other scholars that are thinking the same thing, and they came from all those different unbelievable backgrounds, there's this underlying assumption that, man, you get to Harvard or you get the special forces or you get to be
Right.
in this, that you've arrived. And how, I'm just wondering, how is it that you help others relate to, you know what, everyone has this. It doesn't matter where you are, everyone has this.
Right. I think really, like I said, it's I think a lot of it's conditions based. If I were to go back to Atlanta, Georgia right now to my neighborhood, I think I would see probably the same images that I remember where the bubbles are small, they're socioeconomically disadvantaged people. Um, the literacy rates are low, health literacy, education is challenging in those environments. I think for me, if you can just pull people out of those environments, for me it
Mhm.
was the military.
Yeah.
For others, it may be your local church organization. For others, whatever it is, if you can find these opportunities to pull people out of those environments, and you can show them something different, it's a compounding effect. I'll be honest with you. There were so many things that I've been exposed to in my career that I had no idea even existed. Growing up.
Yeah.
Um, for example, the military service academies. I had no idea there was a West Point. No clue. I had no idea about what it would take to go to college. Because I was never college bound when I was in high school, and so to no detriment to my own parents, they love me dearly, and a lot of the reason why I work so hard is for them and the way they raised me. But they couldn't impart that knowledge on me either because they didn't have those tools and that experience to say this is how you go to college. This is how you take the next step to move up the corporate ladder. They didn't have that, and so when you're in an environment where no one has those tools, no one has those resources, and those resources aren't coming, then you have to figure out a way to pull people out of those environments. And again, us as leaders, at different levels, we have to figure out ways to create those opportunities. Again, for me, it was the military, but I would imagine that in my work in the global health space, focusing on the social determinants of health and health inequities, that's one of the ways that I work on trying to uplift people, because it is important, it's relevant.
Gary, does this remind you of some there? You said something about environments, pulling out of a common environment. There was a couple other guests that brought that same thing. We didn't know because we didn't experience.
Right.
It's so amazingly impactful because that's where a lot of assumptions are based. Oh, you should know better. Well, how would I know better?
Yeah, you don't you don't know what you don't know. And for a lot of people, it's hard to imagine things that they've never seen before. Again, for me, my assumption when I first came into the army was there are no black officers. They don't
Yeah,
exist. I've never seen one.
yeah,
And so when I actually saw one, there is a pathway.
yeah,
And then you start to figure out, I just have to figure out how to position myself to get on that path to make it there.
yeah.
A lot of it's internal, but again, is conditions based. And like, I really wholeheartedly, there's so many people um, that were so instrumental. And I'll give you this one other anecdotal story. Was there's a Jason Durr, and Jason Durr was my sergeant when I was in Fort Benning, Georgia, and he said, "Private." I was a private at the time. He said, "You're going to go to college," and I said, "I can't go. I'm not smart enough. I can't do it. You can't make me do it." He said, "Okay." He said, "Listen, I'm a sergeant in the United States Army. I own you 24 hours a day. So," he said, "if you don't go to college, I can find something for you to do until I get tired." So he made me go to school. I hated him for it. He made me go to school. Would you believe that about 12 years later, this was 2010, um, I'm the executive officer for a clinic in Germany, Baumholder, Germany. I do the hiring and firing of certain positions. I'm going through resumes, and I see a Jason Durr. He's a social worker. I said, this can't be him. And so he was highly qualified. That's the reason why his application made it to me. And I gave him a call, and would you believe it was Jason Durr? And I said, I am your private that you made go to college about 11, 12 years ago. And so I hired Jason Durr. It was amazing. It was full circle, and I was able to hire him. And he was once my leader. So I have all these anecdotal stories where people just pour into me, and then you pay it forward. I know it sounds like an empty platitude, but it's not. It's really finding ways to just invest in people.
Oh man, you have. I can't believe how many times you come full circle with these
Just,
mentors of
just a
yours.
lot of circles.
Where are we going to pop in 10 years from now, Mo?
Yeah.
I'm kind of worried now.
Oh my goodness. Well, again, another thing though, you got to get to it. Chief Medical Officer of the White House. Here you
Mhm.
are. You've from Mr. Durr to everyone. You're way up. What? How did that come about? And
Yeah,
I don't want to go, and I don't want to go on the redundant question.
political end.
What did it mean to you? And blah blah blah. But how did that come about? And what were some things that you saw in that? If whatever you could share, but
Yeah.
what was the impact because of that?
Well, I can tell you that being a part of the White House Medical Unit was the capstone for my career. So it was where I exited the military. I spent a little over 3 years there. Um, it goes back to exposure. Who would have guessed, right? Who would have known? But when I finished PA school, I was working with a guy named Stuart Miller, and he had once worked at the White House, and I was like, that is a thing. Like you can actually go and work. I mean, what do you do there? And I have all these other follow up questions, and so. Once I saw that there was a pathway, I figured out how to, sort of navigate the waters, if you will, to be able to get on that path. I kept having more exposure. I had a good friend, Travis Kaufman, who ended up going to the White House from Hawaii. We all were in Hawaii, and I remember just being so enamored by him. He was such the epitome of a professional. And I said, God, if I can just be like him, maybe I can make it to the White House. And so eventually the opportunity presented itself. I flew out to DC. I interviewed. Um, Very elongated, process of interviewing from security perspectives and things like that. But eventually I was selected, and I can tell you that it was a humbling experience. Uh, Irrespective of what your political leanings are, to be able to support the office of the president, office of the vice president is just phenomenal. A lot of what I did was medical planning for the president, but I was also the primary provider for the first lady, for the vice president. Spent a lot of times, both administrations, the Trump administration and the Biden administration, about equal time. And so it was just an honor because you end up working with the people at the top of their career, the best Secret Service agents, the best military personnel, the best whatever. And so again, you start to humble yourself to say, I don't know everything.
Yeah.
But I'm on this amazing team, and collectively we know a whole lot. And so I think that was one of the things that I really took from that assignment. I think it was probably the best time I had in the military.
What I appreciate about that, Bernard, is the fact that we're in such a divisive time. Everyone sees it. I mean, all I had to do is look at the news. And
Sure, yeah.
but the perspective that you've just brought um, from serving two administrations
Hmm.
is that you served them as people. You didn't look at the political side of it, everything. You were planning it according to what was best for them and for their staff and for everyone else in that administration. And so oftentimes, I know that I get sidetracked by opinion and by sticking to my guns. And
Hmm.
you're in one of those circumstances that, irrespective of the political nature, you saw the people side of it and the impact. You have those purviews into people that we, as a general population, absolutely do not have. You see
Right.
the good of all those different things, and man, again, it just goes back to what you're talking about. I didn't know there was something else. And sometimes I think there's so many things that we don't know that if we had those insights that you shared here, it'd be a whole different story. My assumption.
It
That's my
true.
assumption, of course.
It truly is, and I'll tell you. I mean, being in the White House Medical Unit, our positions are apolitical, meaning that we don't change with administrations. If you're a political appointee, when the president leaves, you leave. It's time for you to go. But for the military, we generally stay there for about 3 years or so. It depends on what your position is, but apolitical. And I think when you're interviewing through that process, I think that's what we look for. We look for people who are going to be the consummate professional, and be humble. Because I will tell you, more than anything else, it may seem great to a lot of people, but I was one of the lowest guys on the totem pole there. And so it takes a lot of humility to do things that you probably wouldn't do otherwise. And so I think that the concept for me up to this point in my life is lifting as I climb, because I've had so many others lift me as they climb the ranks, whether it was in the military, or out of the military. But that's the concept. Is only effective, if you can bring others with you.
I
That's where the impact occurs. That's where the meaning is. You can't enjoy your success forever. I mean, you have to be able to impart and spread that opportunity for other people to make those impacts, those pebbles in the water, if you will, those ripple effects,
yeah.
to be able to expand out. And that's, for me, that's more important than anything I could have done as a single individual.
Oh my goodness.
Well, what's cool
Wow.
about that is, in a lot of ways, in leadership, in corporations and stuff like that, that's not the norm.
Mm-mm.
You see so many times where, like, on a leadership level, it's almost a scarcity mentality where, don't you dare leave this company and move on, like that's you're being disrespectful or whatever it might be. But some of my greatest moments in leadership has been getting that person to the next level, even if it put me in a difficult situation, a shortage in staff or whatever it might be.
Right.
But I think that's so underrated, and it's so important, is if we can think about purposely making those ripples and positive, moments in people's lives. And basically, I always look at it as get them where they need to go. And I think I love that statement you said, lift as you climb.
That's the title of this podcast, man.
Well, I have another question for you, and I don't know. I'm just stuck on just this Bernard where he is today and Bernard younger. And
right.
Something I've been thinking a lot about lately is, as human beings, we always kind of seek this level of homeostasis. We want everything to be normal, whatever that normal might be. For many people, it's like there's comfort in a bad relationship. There's comfort in eating an entire gallon of ice cream. There's comfort in, being in a bad job or whatever it might be. So I'll date myself, back in the early 90s, I was doing volunteer work in some projects in Connecticut. And, I kind of gravitate towards youth, and I was talking to basically a gangbanger at the time. I'm like, why don't you leave? Just go. Like, I'll pay a bus fare for you. Just go somewhere and start over. But for him, that was his comfort, and that's what he knew. And it was shocking to me. And so I guess my question for you is, as you say, a lot of it comes down to exposure. But how do we give these kids exposure enough that they can have the belief and to basically jump off into the deep end and make that next step? You've been there, and that's why I'm asking you.
Well, yeah, I think the challenge is there's competition in messaging, right? So, like, it's who's validating a person. When I was growing up, the only people who validated me were people who were doing things that are less than honorable, if you will. I mean, they were who goes and gets 12 gold teeth? Who who does these things? Well, you're validated, and that's what makes people feel good. You were just talking about
Mhm.
the gallon of ice cream. For the gang members, that becomes a family in circumstances in which they may not have a good nucleus to be able to say, "This is my family that loves me and takes care of me." So it's really finding a way to compete with that message. It's really is
Mhm.
because if you're being validated, let's say in your case as a gang member, um, well, generally speaking, all the people outside of that environment, they aren't telling you good things about yourself. They aren't
Mm.
they aren't looking at
Wow.
you with praise.
Wow.
They aren't, and so we have to figure out ways as we leave those environments, we have to figure out ways to come back and validate those people and help them see themselves in a way that they probably never have seen themselves. And so I think that's where that's incumbent upon us to be able to reinvest into those communities. And what hurts me a lot is the school that I went through, elementary, is still where it was 30 years ago. Like
Mm.
nothing changed. It's still, if you look at greatschools.org, it's still a 1 out of 10 school. Not
Mm.
even going to mention the name of the school, but it's still a 1 out of 10 school on greatschools.org. And I would almost wonder if if that 1 out of 10 is actually like, could it be negative? Like there's no negative
Yeah.
score, right? And so like
Yeah.
I wonder, just how bad is bad, and what does it take to go back to those communities, because there's a lot of structural things that aren't going to change anytime soon. Let's say, for example, a lot of the public school system requires tax money investment for its books, for its teachers, for its facilities. Where if you live in a social economic status that's very, very low, there isn't a lot of tax revenue. Well, how do you compete with that? How do you
Yeah.
compete with there are no more, monetary financial resources coming? And that's where the creativity of leadership comes into play, is we have to figure out a way to compete with those messages that
Mm.
are comforting to people in some of the most dire circumstances. But we also have to figure out a way to compete with the externalities, the truths that there aren't a lot of resources being poured into those environments. That's our job, is to figure out ways to create those.
Love
Gary,
it.
I love the question that you just posed because, and Bernard, the answer you just gave just made me realize how many times I have been such a buffoon and have made a judgment call because of the appearance or like gang, come on, get out of that gang. What it's easy to say that stuff. But when you just said that they validate,
Hmm.
and whereas the external sources aren't validating, that was heavy, man. It just
Right.
went back to we interviewed a individual named Aaron Stark, and he was the title of his TED talk was "I was the next school shooter." How I was
Hmm.
almost the next school shooter, and he said that his pivot point came when all these people were telling him that he was worthless and useless and that stuff. The friend kept on was always there. And then the
Hmm.
statement that he said to us was, sometimes we need to love most the people that look like they deserve it least. And my goodness, Bernard, this is something that you continue to do on a regular basis. And just it's pulling at the heartstrings because I'll go back to the buffoonery that I've exhibited because that's the assumption that I have. Just get out of it when we don't really understand where those validations are coming from, right? So,
Right.
oh,
Well,
wow.
and
Right.
to take it to another level, like you said, is many of the institutions that are supposed to be helping pull people out of those situations. Like you ran into that, Bernard, with people that were trying to get you out of the military. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Oh,
you see it in religious organizations where they
Hmm.
don't want the person that's the alcoholic or whatever it is.
Right.
I see it in healthcare where we call it the frequent flyer, where we just have we know that guy, he's never going to change, you know
Right.
and we just kick
Right.
him through the system, and
Right.
it's bad.
Right. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Emergency departments, I know exactly what you're talking about. Is seeing those people who just generally don't want to see. And I liken it to seeing that homeless person. Oftentimes, you'll talk to homeless people, and they'll tell you most people don't look at them. They avoid that. I mean, we've all
Yeah.
been there. We say, oh, I just don't want to. I don't want to be dealing with this today. But the reality is they're humans, and
Yes.
we have to constantly remind ourselves. I have to remind myself, that I could have been there. That when I see the guy that looks like he's straight out of the hood right now, um, I have to talk to myself to say that I was once there as well. It's not a natural thing, especially when your life changed to where you're wearing business suits and riding in presidential motorcades and things like that.
Yeah.
Is not something that you're connected with necessarily anymore. But you have to remind yourself that you were once there, or you could have been there, or your loved ones may be there. It's definitely a challenge, and it's something that we have to work on. I think, not to proselytize here, but there's a reason why loving your enemy is so hard. Loving the people who are different from you is so hard, and it's a constant reminder in the Bible to do so. It's because it's not easy, and so I empathize um, with those leaders who didn't want me in the military.
Mm.
Ironically, I empathize with them, and I also understand their rationale. Um, do I agree with it? No. I understand it, but I don't agree with it. And I think that's what we have to focus on, is how do we change the narrative that people, certain people, whatever category or buckets that we place them in, are irredeemable, because that's never the case.
Man, you make me feel good about myself. You know, I'm a buffoon, but just you've opened it up, and this happens almost every time we interview someone. The teachings, the learnings that we get are so, it's so simple but so impactful, and that you've done it throughout the interview. These questions, Gary, I don't know where you pulled some of those questions out of.
Well, I just want to say real quick, I am so grateful that you are in healthcare. I can't even tell you how grateful I am that someone with a mentality and an outlook like you have
Yes.
is in a position to do things.
Gary, you
And
got to tell them what you do for a living.
I'm a ED nurse by trade, but now I do more administration type stuff.
So you completely get it. You completely get the burnout, the loss of empathy. Yeah, absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Yeah, it was. I am kind of an eternal optimist in a lot of ways, and I can't wait to see the positive impact that comes from the crap that happened for the last couple of years. I think there's going to be a lot of good stuff.
Well, so Bernard, you went boom, 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 and you've arrived. That's what everyone and anyway, that's what I see. That's what people are looking at, and just, man, you were a chief medical officer over there, and and there's another thing that you had written that I thought was a great, not necessarily opposite of that, but it was, you asked the question, is your success becoming the enemy of happiness?
Hmm.
And you have had a lot of success. You're
Hmm.
one of the most humble individuals I've ever met. And I don't know how you would have ever let success become an enemy of happiness. And I know there's a lot of people that, including me sometimes, that let that be the forefront of things. But what have you learned in what evoked that question? And what were some of the things that you found out as answers to that question?
Yeah. So I was lucky to have talked to a lot of general officers in my career. And it was sort of, I never made it to become a general officer, but it's sort of the same concept. Is when you're at the top of your game, whatever that game is, you end up having the benefit and the gift of hindsight. And so a lot of general officers that I talked to, they would give me this article, short read, that was called, I believe it was, Important versus Urgent. And the important things are the things that unfortunately, like many, I neglected my family.
Mm.
It was always wait until I do this. I got to do this. I got to get my doctorate. I got to get my MPH. I got to go to the United Nations. Wait, the presidential election is so important. It's going to expand over 8, 9 months, and so all these things were urgent, and I neglected the things that were important. And so what happens is when you do that long enough, and a lot of us do it, we end up realizing that at the end of it all, we don't have what's important in our lives. Maybe that's divorce. Maybe that's your kids don't know you. Maybe that ostracize yourself, from your close friends and things like that. And I realized not too late that I was doing that, and that was sort of the reason why I retired. In the military, you don't have to retire at 20 years, but I chose to retire at 20 years and sort of like truncated my career, my growth militarily, because I wanted to focus on what was important. I
Mhm.
can tell you the urgent things were going to keep showing up. It was going to be the next military campaign, the next engagement over here, and all those urgent issues will cloud and make translucent what should be very transparent, and that's your family, your
Yeah.
loved ones. And so that was the choice that I made, and that was what I wanted to sort of impart on people, because I know that a lot of my LinkedIn connections are wildly successful, more so than I will ever be. And when you pull back those layers and you talk to people, you'll see that a lot of times they aren't as happy as what the outward appearance is. That
Mhm.
sort of Instagram
Yes.
phenomenon where, oh,
Yes.
I've made it and I've done all these things. It's like, well, yeah, if you really want to know how a man's living, talk to his wife.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
It's
Yes.
true. True.
A good friend of mine. He was my boss, and he was so happy at work, but his wife was so miserable. And so you got to figure out a way to balance that. And I think that's a juggling act, especially when you started to excel and do well in whatever your craft is, because you're given more opportunities, and those things compound, and you have to figure out when is enough enough. And for me, I was able to say in my career, I'm happy. Enough is enough. And so I'll go ahead and retire now.
You know,
That's awesome.
I,
And
I've
it
got
kind of
to
reminds
ask
me of
you.
it
Oh, go
reminds me
ahead.
of that statement that if you can't enjoy the journey, you're not going to be happy when you get to the destination. It's going
Ooh,
to
You're
fall
not.
flat.
that's a great saying, Gare.
Yeah.
Well,
The
the reason I
the
say
term.
that is there's points in my life where I could say I was successful or whatever, and I have no recollection of my family at all. And
Mm,
to me, that hurts. That's something I look back on with regret.
mm,
Yeah, I've had friends, especially again, the White House is the best unit I've ever worked at, but we traveled incessantly. Um, and I had friends that will tell me, their children might say something like that. I didn't invite you because I knew you were not going to be available anyway.
oh,
Or yeah, I mean, and the kids
oh,
and everyone just becomes very stone. And so even my daughter, I spent a lot of time with the vice president, and she was like, are you going to sleep here tonight, or are you going to be with the vice president? And so even my daughter had a little bit of anxiety when I retired from the White House. She's only 5, but she didn't believe that I was going to sleep in my own bed, that night. She's
wow.
like, "Are you sure you're going to be here tomorrow? Are you sure?" It took a lot for me, and I was like, "This is not normal. This is not normal for." And again, there's a season. I think looking forward, maybe my daughter might say, "You know what? My dad worked for." When he wasn't taking care of me, he was taking care of the first half black, half Asian vice president, and that's what my daughter is. She's half Korean, half black. Maybe she might be proud of that. I'm hopeful that she will. But in that same vein, if I'm not present, then it means nothing. Then I'm
Mm,
just like this resume, this LinkedIn profile. I might as well be a stranger to her. And so that was sort of my focus, was trying to pivot and focus on my family as much as possible.
Well,
I
I have
gotta,
to say real quick, I thought it was interesting, and I caught this when we first jumped on. Maurice was going into his Maurice mode of just he started, and you had a big old fat grin on your face, Bernard, and then he started going through your who's who kind of your LinkedIn thing, and all of a sudden you just went really serious. Like you could tell that that's not who you are. I mean, it's
Exactly.
important. It's part of who you are, but you're more proud of the other stuff that you've done. You can tell. You know, I mean, it's pretty cool.
I am. I mean, like again, I think you're more than your title or your rank or your the letters behind your name. None
Yes.
of that means a whole lot if at the end of all of this,
Mhm.
no one's at your bedside, you know. And so I've had great officers that have taught me that, and I think they taught me that because they experienced it themselves. The current
Mhm.
Surgeon General of the Army, General Dingle, I was in a meeting with him one day, and he mentioned that um, he wasn't available for some family members at certain points of his career and stuff like that, and it was like this conflict of success, and he's no different from every other general and officer and things like that. I think we all have to deal with that, but I think it's is letting people know that it's okay to not take every single opportunity that presents itself, if it's going to be to some detriment of the things that enable you to thrive and be happy. And it's not a zero sum game. It's not I have to turn down opportunity in order to be a great family man. I think it's a juggling act, and I think that's what mentors are here to do, is to help navigate those waters. Because the officers that have mentored me and educated me and things like that, they did a great job, and I think they're successful at balancing those types of things.
Man,
Awesome.
it is fantastic. I will say this. I lived in Hawaii for a number of years too, and
Wow.
I love it. And when I remember where I was, one of the most happiest places was on the north end of the Big Island of Hawaii in Kohala, right?
Mhm.
Hawaii, Kohala, and not the richest folks. Matter of fact, it was middle class and maybe even some below. I've never seen happier people, because
Mhm.
they were always they were always bringing over mangoes, papayas, bananas. They were sharing everything. Didn't have a ton, but they shared everything that they had. And the one thing that really stood out was how important their family was. It didn't matter what event, they made a big deal out of everything, and that extended
Right.
family was just so profound. It impacted me.
Yeah.
It still impacts me to this day.
Right.
And just to see the Ohana spirit that
Yep.
that
I
you
know it
bring to
very
the
well.
table, yeah,
I know it very well.
it's apparent that you have that mana, that family power, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember in Hawaii walking down the beach and, hey, brother, come over here, eat some barbecue. And you go over, and it's like, I don't know you.
Exactly.
Um, yeah, I mean, there's definitely happiness and success, but success does not equal happiness. And so I think that's the balance that I'm always trying to strike. I don't get it right all the time, especially if you ask my wife. I don't get it right all the time. Um, but I think that's the goal. And I think as long as that's the goal and that's the target and you're shooting for that every single time, then it's hard for people to say that you didn't try your best.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, Bernard, this has been a fantastic journey. I love the stories that you told, but just the learning that you shared with us. It's just I know that I'm going to be applying a lot of this almost immediately. I know I'm going to go to my wife right now and go, you wouldn't believe what's happened here. So I have to thank you for that.
Right. I'm doing that too. Tonight I'm going home to my wife. I gotta say thank you, honey. If it were not for you, I wouldn't be here.
Perfect. Well, if there's anything that we could ever do for you, please let us know. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Gentlemen, I really appreciate the opportunity to sit down and talk with you guys.